My name is Daniel Crawford. I am 38 years old, and I work as a sheriff's deputy for Walworth County Sheriff's Department, covering rural patrol areas, including the townships around Elkhorn, Wisconsin, where I respond to calls throughout the agricultural and woodland areas of southeastern Wisconsin. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where you are watching from, please. I've been working law enforcement for 14 years, spending the last 9 on rural patrol covering back roads, farms, and wooded areas where calls can range from domestic disputes to wildlife encounters. The area around Elkhorn includes a mix of farmland, small towns, and patches of forest that connect to larger wilderness areas to the north. This happened last October while I was responding to a call about aggressive wildlife on Bray Road, a quiet rural route that runs through farmland and scattered woods about 8 miles southeast of Elkhorn. The caller, a local farmer, reported that something large had killed 2 of his sheep and was still in the area. Bray Road is typical of the rural roads I patrol. Gravel surface, minimal traffic, running past farms, and through patches of woodland that provide cover for deer, bears, and other wildlife that occasionally cause problems for local residents. I arrived at the farm around 10 p.m. and met with the property owner, who showed me where he'd found the dead sheep in a pasture about 200 yards from his house. The animals had been killed with violence that exceeded anything I'd seen from normal predators. The sheep showed evidence of attack by something with tremendous physical strength. Both animals had massive bite wounds and claw marks that suggested a predator much larger and more powerful than the wolves, bears, or feral dogs that occasionally cause livestock problems in Wisconsin. Most concerning was that the attack appeared deliberate and systematic rather than the feeding behavior typical of natural predators. The sheep had been killed but not consumed, suggesting that whatever had attacked them was motivated by aggression rather than hunger. I documented the scene with photographs and took measurements of tracks I found in the soft earth around the dead animals. The prints were unusual, roughly canine, but much larger than any dog tracks I'd seen, with claw marks that indicated something extremely powerful. Around 11 p.m., while I was completing my investigation of the livestock attack, I heard sounds from the wooded area adjacent to the farm that immediately got my attention. Deep growling and movement through the underbrush that suggested something large moving toward my position. I drew my weapon and used my flashlight to scan the tree line, following standard protocols for dangerous wildlife encounters. What I saw challenged everything I understood about wildlife in southeastern Wisconsin. Emerging from the woods was a creature that appeared to be part wolf and part human. It was approximately 7 feet tall, walking upright on hind legs like a person, but with a wolf-like head, pointed ears, and a body covered in dark fur. The creature moved with intelligence and purpose that clearly distinguished it from natural wildlife. It approached to within 50 feet of my position and stood there studying me with obvious awareness and calculation. Most disturbing was that the creature showed no fear of my uniform, vehicle, or weapon. It observed me with the confidence of an apex predator that considered itself superior to human authority and equipment. The creature remained visible for about 3 minutes, during which time I attempted to radio for backup while maintaining visual contact. My radio experienced interference that prevented clear communication, forcing me to rely on my own judgment about how to handle an encounter with something that didn't match any known species. Then the creature turned and walked back into the woods with fluid grace that covered ground much faster than human walking. I followed at a safe distance, but quickly lost sight of it in the dense underbrush. I spent the next hour searching the area where the creature had disappeared, and found additional tracks that confirmed something large and bipedal had been moving through the woods. The tracks led deeper into the forest toward areas that connected to larger wilderness regions. When I returned to the sheriff's department and filed my report, I described the incident as an encounter with an unidentified large predator that had killed livestock and required follow-up investigation by wildlife authorities. 3 days later, I was contacted by Linda Godfrey, a journalist and author who specialized in Wisconsin cryptozoology and had been investigating reports of werewolf-like creatures in the Elkhorn area since 1999. She requested an interview about my Bray Road encounter. Linda explained that similar creature sightings had been reported on Bray Road and surrounding areas for over 20 years, with consistent descriptions from law enforcement officers, farmers, and motorists who had encountered bipedal wolf-like beings. She showed me historical accounts from other Walworth County deputies and state patrol officers who had filed reports about encounters with creatures that matched my observation. The sightings clustered around specific rural roads and wooded areas near Elkhorn. According to Linda's research, the beast of Bray Road had become one of Wisconsin's most documented cryptozoological phenomena, with over 50 reported sightings from credible witnesses, including law enforcement, emergency responders, and long-time local residents. Linda also mentioned that the creature seemed to be territorial about specific areas and appeared most frequently during late fall and winter months, when other wildlife was less active. The timing of sightings suggested the creature had established patterns of movement through southeastern Wisconsin. I spoke with other Walworth County deputies who had worked rural patrol in the Elkhorn area. Two of them described similar encounters with large bipedal predators, but both had been reluctant to file detailed reports due to concerns about credibility and departmental policy regarding unusual wildlife claims. One veteran deputy told me that encounters with unknown predators had been reported in the area since the 1980s, but that such reports were generally handled quietly to avoid media attention that might interfere with normal law enforcement operations. I continue working rural patrol in Walworth County because it is important work protecting agricultural communities and residents who live in areas where emergency response can be challenging. But I am much more cautious now when responding to calls involving aggressive wildlife, particularly in wooded areas around Elkhorn where previous encounters have been reported. When I patrol Bray Road and surrounding rural routes, I maintain increased awareness for signs of large predators and trust my instincts about situations that might involve creatures that aren't officially recognized, but clearly exist in Wisconsin's rural areas. My name is Robert Timberman. I am 49 years old, and I work as a foreman for Northwoods Logging Company, supervising timber harvesting operations throughout the forests of northern Wisconsin, including areas around Rhinelander and the Chequamegon Nicolete National Forest. I've been working in the logging industry for 26 years, spending most of that time in Wisconsin's Northwoods region, where we conduct sustainable timber harvesting in both private forest lands and designated areas of the National Forest System. This happened last August while supervising a logging crew working in a section of mixed hardwood and pine forest about 12 miles northeast of Rhinelander, near the boundary between private timberland and the Chequamegon Nicolete National Forest. Our crew was harvesting mature aspen and oak trees in an area that had been designated for thinning to improve forest health and reduce fire risk. The work involved using heavy equipment to fell marked trees and prepare logs for transport to processing facilities. I was supervising 4 experienced loggers using chainsaws and skidder equipment to harvest trees in a systematic pattern that would minimize environmental impact while achieving production targets. The crew had been working the site for 5 days and was making good progress. Around noon on the 6th day, while we were taking lunch break near our equipment staging area, one of my loggers approached me with obvious concern about something he'd been observing in the forest. Pete Kowalski, who'd been working these woods for 18 years, told me he'd been hearing unusual sounds and catching glimpses of something large moving through the trees. Pete described hearing crashes and breaking branches that suggested something much larger than deer or bear moving through the forest. He also mentioned finding trees that appeared to have been deliberately damaged or marked with claw or horn gouges in bark that didn't match any known Wisconsin wildlife. Around 2 p.m., while we were operating skidder equipment to move harvested logs, the entire crew became aware of something watching us from the forest. The feeling was unmistakable. That sense of being observed by something hidden in the woods beyond our work area. I called for a work break and had the crew gather near our equipment while I investigated the feeling of being watched. About 100 yards away, at the edge of a dense stand of pine trees, I could see movement that appeared to be something large positioning itself to observe our logging operation. Through binoculars, I caught glimpses of what appeared to be a massive creature moving between the trees with obvious intelligence. The creature was dark in color, approximately 7 feet tall, and appeared to have projections from its head that looked like horns or antlers. Most remarkable was that the creature seemed to be studying our timber harvesting operation with apparent interest, moving to different positions to observe our work from various angles while maintaining enough distance to avoid clear identification. Around 3 p.m., while we were using chainsaws to process fallen trees, something began making vocalizations from the forest that didn't match any animal sounds we knew. Deep, rumbling calls that seemed part roar and part bellow, clearly intended to get our attention. The vocalizations were followed by the sound of trees being deliberately damaged, breaking branches, scraping bark, and impacts that suggested something extremely powerful was marking territory or demonstrating its presence to our logging crew. I made the decision to suspend logging operations and move the crew back to our equipment staging area near the logging road access. As we were securing chainsaws and preparing to leave, we discovered evidence that something had been investigating our work site. Large tracks in soft earth near where we'd been working showed something with clawed feet had approached very close to our operation. The tracks were unlike anything in my 26 years of logging, larger than bear prints, but with a different shape and gait pattern. Most concerning were deep gouges in trees around our work area that appeared fresh and deliberate. The marks were made by something with tremendous strength, cutting through bark and into hardwood with claws or horns that left distinctive patterns. When we returned to our base camp that evening, I reported the incident to Northwoods Logging Company as a potentially dangerous wildlife encounter, requiring assessment before we could continue operations in that area. 2 days later, I was contacted by Dr. Sarah Mills from the University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point, who specialized in Wisconsin folklore and cryptozoology. She had heard about our encounter through forestry industry contacts and requested an interview about what we'd observed. Dr. Mills explained that creature encounters matching our description had been reported in the Rhinelander area for over a century, with the being known locally as the hodag, described as a 7-foot-tall creature with horns, claws, and aggressive territorial behavior. She showed me historical accounts from logging operations dating back to the early 1900s, describing encounters with large horned creatures that demonstrated intelligence, curiosity about human activities, and physical capabilities that exceeded known Wisconsin wildlife. According to Dr. Mills' research, the hodag legend had originated from actual creature sightings by loggers and settlers in northern Wisconsin, with descriptions that remained remarkably consistent across different time periods and different witnesses. She also explained that the creature seemed to be particularly active in areas where logging operations disturbed its habitat, occasionally appearing to observe or investigate human activities in the forest. The timing of our encounter was consistent with historical patterns of hodag sightings. I spoke with other logging supervisors who had worked in the Rhinelander area for decades. 2 of them described similar encounters with large unknown creatures, but both had been reluctant to report such incidents due to concerns about how unusual wildlife claims might affect logging permits and contracts. One veteran logger told me that his grandfather had worked the same forests in the 1940s and had described encounters with creatures that matched our observations. He suggested that the hodag had been living in northern Wisconsin forests for generations, occasionally interacting with logging operations when its territory was disturbed. I continue working timber harvesting in Wisconsin's Northwoods because it is important work that provides sustainable forest management while supporting local communities that depend on the logging industry. But I am much more respectful now of the possibility that these forests might be home to inhabitants that aren't officially recognized, and I maintain cautious protocols when crews report unusual encounters or evidence of large unknown animals in our work areas. My name is William Forrest. I am 45 years old, and I work as a park ranger for the U.S. Forest Service assigned to the Chequamegon Nicolate National Forest in northern Wisconsin, where I conduct wilderness patrol, visitor assistance, and search and rescue operations across the forest's 1.5 million acres. I've been working as a forest ranger for 17 years, spending the last 12 in northern Wisconsin, covering some of the most remote wilderness areas in the upper Midwest. The Chequamegon Nicolate National Forest includes vast areas of pristine forest, numerous lakes, and wilderness regions that see minimal human activity. This happened last November while investigating the disappearance of Kevin Martinez, a 29-year-old from Milwaukee, who had been deer hunting alone in a remote section of the forest, about 25 miles northwest of Park Falls, Wisconsin. Martinez had obtained proper hunting permits and had informed family members of his planned hunting area and expected return date. He was an experienced outdoorsman, familiar with Wisconsin hunting regulations and forest safety procedures. When Martinez failed to return as scheduled, his family contacted the Forest Service to report him missing. I began search operations immediately, following standard protocols for missing persons in wilderness areas where weather conditions and terrain can create serious survival challenges. The area where Martinez had been hunting included dense mixed forest of aspen, birch, and pine trees, with scattered clearings and seasonal wetlands that provide habitat for deer and other wildlife. It is challenging terrain where even experienced hunters can become disoriented if they venture away from established trails. I started my search at Martinez's vehicle, which was parked at a forest road access point that provided entry to several thousand acres of hunting area. The vehicle was properly secured and contained no evidence of problems or emergency situations. Following hunting regulations, Martinez would have been required to stay within specific boundaries and check in periodically with family members. His hunting plan indicated he intended to focus on an area about 3 miles from the road access, in forest that offered good deer habitat but required careful navigation. About 2 miles into my search, following what appeared to be Martinez's route based on compass bearings from his hunting plan, I found his hunting rifle leaning against a large oak tree beside a deer trail. The rifle was positioned as if Martinez had carefully placed it there before continuing deeper into the forest. The rifle was loaded and ready for use, making it unlikely that Martinez would have abandoned it voluntarily during active hunting. Most concerning was that I found no tracks or other signs indicating his direction of travel after leaving the weapon. Expanding my search area, I followed deer trails and potential routes that a hunter might use to pursue game deeper into the forest. About a mile from the rifle location, I discovered Martinez's hunting pack hanging from a tree branch about 10 feet above the ground. The pack contained all his essential hunting gear: ammunition, food, water, first aid kit, compass, and emergency supplies. Most disturbing was that his hunting license and identification were in the pack, along with his cell phone and car keys. I found no evidence of climbing activity that would explain how the pack had reached that height, and no signs of struggle or emergency that would cause a hunter to abandon essential survival equipment. The pack placement suggested deliberate positioning rather than accident or animal interference. I immediately radioed for additional search personnel and established a search command post near where Martinez's gear had been discovered. Over the next 4 days, we conducted intensive searches using ground teams, search dogs, and helicopter reconnaissance. The search operation included volunteers from local hunting clubs, Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources personnel, and experienced wilderness trackers who knew the Chequamegon forest intimately. Despite covering extensive areas, we found no additional trace of Martinez. On the 5th day of searching, one of our search dogs indicated interest in an area about 3 miles further into the forest, in terrain that would be extremely difficult to reach during hunting season, when fallen leaves and seasonal weather create challenging travel conditions. We found no physical evidence of Martinez in that area, but several search team members reported unusual phenomena that made them reluctant to continue searching in that location. Sounds of voices calling from areas where no searchers were present, and feelings of being watched by unseen presences from the dense forest. The official search was suspended after 7 days, when all reasonable areas had been covered and no additional evidence could be located. Martinez was listed as a missing person, and his case was turned over to local law enforcement for continued investigation. Martinez's disappearance was the 4th similar case I'd encountered during my years working in the Chequamegon forest. In each case, experienced outdoorsmen had vanished after abandoning their equipment in patterns that suggested systematic, rather than emergency abandonment. I reviewed files from similar cases in northern Wisconsin and discovered that unexplained disappearances had been occurring in the Chequamegon forest for decades. Missing persons cases involving hunters, hikers, and outdoor enthusiasts who vanished without trace despite extensive search efforts. I spoke with veteran forest rangers who had worked in northern Wisconsin for decades about patterns in missing persons cases. They described disappearances that occurred primarily during hunting season and late fall, always involving people who were alone in remote forest areas. One retired ranger told me about traditional knowledge from the Ojibwe Nation, whose ancestors had lived in northern Wisconsin forests for thousands of years before European settlement. According to tribal teachings, certain areas of the forest were considered dangerous for solitary travelers. The traditional knowledge described entities or forces that could influence human behavior in ways that caused people to abandon safety equipment and venture into areas where they couldn't survive or be found. These influences were strongest during specific seasons and in areas that held spiritual significance. The ranger explained that Ojibwe hunting traditions included specific protocols for safely traveling alone in the forest, with spiritual preparations and awareness of signs that indicated when forest conditions weren't appropriate for human presence. I continue working in the Chequamegon Nicollet National Forest because it is essential conservation work protecting one of Wisconsin's most important wilderness areas. But I am much more cautious now about solo activity recommendations for visitors, particularly during hunting season, when people spend extended time alone in remote forest areas. When visitors go missing in the forest, I begin search operations immediately rather than waiting for standard reporting periods. And I document any unusual discoveries while understanding that some disappearances in Wisconsin's northern forests might involve factors that conventional search and rescue techniques aren't designed to address.